Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with a video about more cell stuff. Here are the questions. Now, at the end of this video, I ask you to write down 5 questions on your own. I've since changed my mind and added these questions, so just ignore what I say at the end about writing questions. Here are the real ones. And here is the video.
Hi, this is Mr. Mitchell. We're going to have a video talking about stuff inside the cell. Now, we're not talking about organelles. We're talking about the liquids and the materials that get into the cells, the cell compounds. It's going to be this first video on that. You can see that we have some terms here off on the left. An element is a substance that cannot be broken down into simpler substances. Now let me kind of clarify. An atom is the smallest form of an element. You can have an element, in fact, the periodic table that you'll study a little bit more next year has around 100 elements that we find here on Earth. One of those elements is gold. You can have a brick of gold and it just be that one element. So elements don't have to be very small, but when you are talking about the smallest part of an element, like that gold, you're talking about being in atoms. Now I have over here some examples of atoms. You can see here we have a hydrogen atom right here. In fact, we have 2 of them put together, and you'll find out later that they don't come individually very easily. I have an oxygen atom over on the left, an oxygen atom on the right, nitrogen on the left, nitrogen on the left, right, and so on. So the distinction is between elements and compounds. Whenever you take more than one element and combine them together, that's what makes a compound. There are only 90 or 100 of these elements throughout everything that exists on Earth. So as a result, since we have far more than 100 things that exist on Earth, shoot, we've got 100 things in this room, just in my little corner here, but they all are compounds if they're not elements or something later on called mixtures. Compound is whenever you take more than one atom, combine them, and they form a new product, I guess you might say. For example, water. Here's an example of water. We have the 2 hydrogens, H2, and then you have 1 oxygen, H2O. So hydrogen and oxygen, they're gases, but when you combine them together, they form a liquid called water, and that's how the distinction will be between things that you just mix together and actual compounds. Compounds are really different substances than the elements happen to be. Now, many people get confused between atoms and molecules. The smallest form of an element we mentioned before is an atom. The smallest form of a compound is a molecule. Now take a look here. We have this molecule here of water. This H2O here cannot be broken down anymore, and it still be called water. It could be broken down more and be called oxygen, or it could be broken down more and be called hydrogen, but that is the smallest form. A molecule of water is the smallest form of water. So that's kind of the distinction between these. Now, speaking of water, getting to the cell, water is incredibly important in a cell. Well, our bodies are made of 2/3 water anyway, and that's what most living things are made of as well. You have a very high percentage of water in almost every living thing. So as a result, water is something that will go in and out of the cell, and it plays an incredibly important role. Water dissolves chemicals that cells need. Most chemical reactions could not take place without water, and water helps keep the shape and size. Water in a cell is kind of like air in a balloon. If you take the air out of a balloon, it completely loses its shape. If you take water out of a cell, same thing. It completely loses its shape. Let's talk about organic compounds. Speaking of compounds, once they're organic, have carbon in them. And when you think of organic, it's not just the definition of organic is something that has carbon in it, Something that is organic is living. These compounds are found in living things. Just about all living things, if not all living things, I'm trying to think of an example or a difference, they contain carbon. So living things have these organic compounds in them. So compounds that don't contain carbon, of course, are inorganic. Now I'm just about to go over 4 important organic compounds. So these are things that are found inside cells of living things, including us. Oh, I messed up here. Let's see what I can do. There we are. Here are the 4. We have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Carbohydrates are things such as sugars and starch. Now sugars, as you know, I mean, they help give energy, but sugars are kind of the simple forms of energy. Sugars build together to make starch. Sugars build together to make starch. Now starch are kind of complex. In fact, they have often been referred to as complex carbohydrates. These are large molecules. And what happens is our bodies use starchy foods like bread and pasta and things such as that, and potatoes, to get energy. Our body has a chemical reaction in which you have starch is broken down to something called glucose, and the glucose is part of where we get our energy from. So that's kind of the benefits of starch is there. Another important Another important organic compound I had to go back to look for. Another important organic compound is lipids. Now lipids are not just fats, but they're fats, oils, and waxes. Now kind of the common one that we think of is fats. And I think of the example of the bear that is hibernating. The bear that is hibernating is using his stored up fat for energy over the winter, because the bear's not going to eat anything over the winter. The bear is going to end up using that energy from the stored fat. The bear wakes up, he's a lot thinner because he's been using that stored fat. And if you take a look over here, here is a lipid molecule. And you can see that these fats are kind of just stuck in there. So whenever you need a source of energy, it comes from that fat. And that's one way people lose weight, is whenever they're not constantly putting extra sugars and starches and carbohydrates in their body, then that energy can come from the fats. One that we have talked about has been proteins. Here are some foods that have a lot of proteins. Proteins are large organic molecules. Now, there are a couple of different kinds of proteins. I haven't written them on here, but you will need to know them. They are amino acids and enzymes. Now, I guess you could call amino acids a protein. The amino acids are kind of the building blocks of proteins. There are 20 common amino acids. And from those 20 common amino acids, the body and the bodies of all living things, plants and animals, combine them to make certain kinds of proteins. And when you think about proteins, birds' feathers, spider webs, fingernails, all the way down to the little protein that the ribosomes carry inside of the cell. Those are some of the things that are combined. The amino acids are combined together to make proteins. Now, an enzyme is a kind of protein. An enzyme, and you'll need to know it even though it's not written down here, is a type of protein that speeds up a chemical reaction. An example is, saliva. The saliva has enzymes in it that speed up the digestion process. Even in your mouth, it is starting to break down those starches that you put in there. And a final kind that we're looking at as far as organic compounds is nucleic acid. Now, there's a lot that can be learned about nucleic acids, and I don't know if you can see it here, but DNA and RNA are nucleic acids, deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid, and you know we're going to study those a little bit more. But these are organic compounds, and these are very long organic molecules, and these are going to be found in the cytoplasm. There are two kinds. I'm checking my notes over here: the DNA and the RNA. And it's found, the RNA is found in the cytoplasm. The DNA is found in the chromatin. Now, let me make sure that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. The DNA is found in the chromatin. You know, the chromatin's inside the nucleus, and the cytoplasm is outside of the nucleus. Now the RNA can get in the chromatin as well, but that's where you're going to find the double helix pattern. And let me show you the double helix pattern. Oh, I've got it right here. Here's the double helix pattern that is inside the nucleus of our cells. And that has all kinds of genetic implications. In fact, all the little details about us, the hair color, the eye color, the tall traits, the short traits, the many things, likelihood of getting diseases, are all in this DNA that happens to be here. You know, I realize we do not happen to have any questions with this particular video, and my assignment is for you to go back and to write 5 questions and answers, which to turn in class. Make